he's rather a nice, very mild gentleman.
Rob Reiner and Nick got into a, quote, very loud argument. His behavior at Conan's house alarmed the guest.
For weeks, Mulholland Drive stayed wrapped in a strange silence after a heartbreak that rocked Hollywood. A loss so deep it left a space shaped like Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, two names once inseparable from the spirit of the canyon. Everyone waited for something, a word, a post, a sign from the couple who once brought life to every party and every story around them. The headlines kept spinning wild guesses. Reporters camped out for clues. Friends and insiders shared emotional messages that only made the silence louder. Yet from one man, watching it all from high above, the canyon's living legend, Jack Nicholson, came nothing. No carefully crafted statement, no sources close to Jack, no sneaky leaks online. Not a word. Jack's always marched to his own beat, treating life like one long, unscripted movie. And this time, he wasn't changing the script for anyone. So when he finally decided to speak, it was strictly on his terms. No red carpets, no bright lights, just a recorder resting on a sturdy oak table in his dimly lit living room. The sun dipped low, painting gold streaks across the canyon that had sheltered him for decades. His home felt like a living time capsule, full of art, stories, and echoes of a life lived in full view of the world, yet guarded like a hidden treasure.
I didn't have any real problems with him, and I don't really. There was a substitute male figure in the house. I have older sisters and married. And
He sat there, shades on, not to hide, but because they'd become part of who he is. His face, marked by years of stories, looked sharper now, those famous lines carved deeper, shaped by something heavier than the spotlight. He lifted his glass, the soft clink of ice cutting through the quiet like a heartbeat between unspoken thoughts. The pause hung thick in the air, intentional, chilling, and full of meaning. This wasn't small talk, it felt more like a confession. When Jack finally spoke, his voice came out low and rough like gravel under slow-moving tires. Every word hit with weight, chosen carefully, slicing through all the noise that had built up around this story. You know, the papers, the television, they go on and on about Rob, he said, his tone calm but full of layers. The director, the guy who made Stand By Me, the man behind The Princess Bride. Then came that faint, humorless smile. They talk about Meathead. He paused again, the air getting heavier with memory. That part they get right, he muttered. I guess that's what everyone remembers. The headlines, the awards, the legend stuff. That's what's on the record. His voice softened, but they don't really know him. Jack leaned back slightly, lost in thought. They never heard how quiet a room could get when Rob was deep in thought, really wrestling with something. They never caught the sound of his real laugh, not the one for cameras, but the one that shook the whole room. The kind that made you forget your worries for a second. Like, ain't this all a kick in the head? He leaned forward suddenly, the glass hitting the table with a sharp thud that snapped the air in half. And they sure don't know what it meant to stand by him when things got tough, Jack said, eyes flashing behind his dark shades. It's something raw. That's the real story, isn't it? He says softly, his voice almost blending with the hum of the canyon outside.
Tells NBC News that Nick allegedly interrupted a discussion involving comedian Bill Hader. After Bill told him it was a private conversation, Nick reportedly stood still and stared before, quote, storming off. E! News has reached out to representatives for Bill Hader for comment. 32-year-old Nick was arrested the next day for suspicion of murder and is currently being held without bail.
Reiner could face life in prison without the possibility of parole or even the death sentence.
Having the death penalty on the table is absolutely a bargaining chip. The prosecution is going to leverage that to try to get some sort of deal.
In a statement, the couple's two other children, Jake and Romy Reiner, said, "Word cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing. They weren't just our parents, they were our best."
This is about that kind of love and everything that comes from it. the truth only someone close enough to see both sides could ever tell. The bond between Jack Nicholson and Rob Reiner didn't born out of fame or fancy parties. It came from years of quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Their friendship didn't grow under flashing lights or red carpets. It was built under the heat of one of the most unforgettable courtroom scenes ever filmed, A Few Good Men, back in 1992. People forget, Nicholson says, eyes drifting towards some far-off place only he can see. Rob was an actor first. His voice softens, like he's watching it all play out again in his mind. He leaned back, deep in thought. He wasn't the type of director who stood behind the camera yelling orders like a traffic cop. Nah, Rob was in the moment with you. He lived it, breathed it. Jack's tone lifts, glowing with respect. He knew what it felt like to stare down a blank page, wondering if the words would land or fall flat. He understood the rush, the fear, the courage it takes to stand exposed in front of the whole world. Most directors, Jack says with a smirk, they watch from the sidelines, like observers. But Rob was right there in the trenches with you. His trademark grin flickers across his face as he remembers that legendary courtroom monologue from A Few Good Men. That scene, he says, shaking his head, was pure pressure. Every take felt like walking a tightrope. The script, written by a young and fiery Aaron Sorkin, was a storm of dialogue, every line sharp enough to cut or crash. Angles, reactions, setups, it was all a perfect dance. Tom Cruise moved like lightning, full of that unstoppable energy that filled every inch of the room. And there I was, sitting in that chair, wearing that uniform, just letting the tension build until it felt ready to burst.
Nick was living in his family's guest house at the time. He was found late Sunday afternoon by his sister, Romy. Both parents were discovered having been.
Jack chuckled softly, remembering the rhythm of those endless takes. He let me sit in that fire. He trusted it. Between takes, Rob didn't overtalk or give long speeches. He'd just stroll over, lean close, lock eyes with me, and say something simple, quiet, but sharp. He really thinks he's the hero. Jack pauses, the corners of his mouth tightening. And that's all it took, he says, voice dropping low. That one line changed the entire energy in the room. Jack, never forget that, Rob told him. And that was it. No extra talk, no fluff. He wasn't just directing a scene, he was shaping its soul. Jack's tone softens, the kind of tone people use when they're holding on to a memory that never left them. Then, for the first time, he shares something no one's ever heard before, a quiet moment behind the camera that carried more weight than any line of dialogue. It was after a tough take, Jack says, his eyes narrowing like he's watching it replay. The crew was resetting, lights shifting, people moving around, and Rob just walks over, not to check the monitor, not to give notes, but straight over to me. I was standing off to the side, cigarette in hand, just trying to breathe for a second, he continues. Rob stood next to me, didn't say a word, just stood there. The silence stretches. Then finally, Jack whispers, he says, "My old man Carl once told me the funniest people are always the saddest. I think the most intimidating ones are the most certain." Jack lets that line hang, heavy and thoughtful. He was talking about Colonel Jessup, sure, he says, but really, he was talking about something much deeper, about what happens when someone believes too strongly, too absolutely. The air between them had changed that day. It wasn't about the movie anymore. It was about life. That conversation, Jack continues, turned into two men talking about what it really means to be human.
So since there was blood found in the room, in the shower, in the bed, but there was none on him, he had perhaps the mental wherewithal to clean himself. He bought a Gatorade from a convenience store. He put his hands up when he was approached by the police. So there was enough awareness there.
That's when I realized this wasn't just another job for Rob. He was chasing something real, something honest through every single frame he shot. A friendship built on pure opposites. Reiner, the warm, big-hearted Hollywood figure born into a world of comedy, and Nicholson, the private, unpredictable rebel straight out of New Jersey. But we connected, Jack says, with a half-smile that flickers with old memories. We'd grab lunch, not at Musso and Frank's where everyone's trying to get seen, but at some tucked-away joint nobody cared about. Or sometimes we'd just talk on the phone for hours. His grin fades, replaced with a quiet warmth. We'd talk about the Lakers, about life, about getting older, but mostly we talked about our kids. That was everything for him. That was his whole world. Jack's voice softens, his face caught between pride and pain. The light in the room dims, taking on the same deep glow as the memories he's pulling from. He was so proud of Jake and Romy, Jack begins softly. He loved their spark, their confidence, the way they chased their own dreams. He'd talk about them with that shine in his eyes, the kind of look only a father gets. It was real. It was pure. Then Jack's tone shifts. The room feels heavier, like the air itself tightens. When he talked about Nick, Jack says quietly, the light changed. He leans back, voice steady but full of emotion. It wasn't less love, not at all. If anything, it was deeper. But it carried a certain worry, the kind that keeps you up at night. He pauses, staring off into the distance like he's reaching for the right words. I've been in this town a long time, he says finally. I've seen everything, the highs, the heartbreaks.
That I was, and so were all the people I was working with, trying to do their best under the circumstances. And that's really all you need as a developing actor, is just to be trying to do it well.
I've seen the sons and daughters of famous people rise up and carve their own path, and I've seen others get lost trying to live up to it. His voice sharpens for a brief second. This town can play tricks on you if you're not careful. The fame, the easy access, the constant attention, it can all start to eat at you slowly if you let it. Jack takes a slow breath, steadying himself. Rob wasn't blind to any of that. He knew what could happen. He and Michelle, they did everything they could to keep their kids grounded. Real dinners at home, family trips, quiet nights, normal moments that mean everything in a place like this. They showed up every single time. They were good parents, really good parents, Jack says, his voice soft and full of sincerity. But sometimes, no matter how strong the walls are, the world still finds a way to sneak through the cracks. His words hang in the air, heavy and fragile. The day the news hit, he starts, his tone barely above a whisper. I was home. The phone rang, sharp, too loud for how quiet the house was. He takes a breath. It wasn't an agent or some press call. It was a friend, someone close. His voice catches slightly. They could barely talk, just a whisper on the other end. Jack shakes his head slowly, remembering. You don't process something like that, he murmurs. You just go still. The words that came through the phone didn't sound real, broken, unreal, he repeats quietly. Rob and Michelle, gone. Nick, too. Jack pauses, his voice trembling for a beat before he regains control. At first, it doesn't make sense. Your mind refuses to believe it. The picture it paints, no one's ready for it. His tone drifts, distant. It's like the rules of the world just stop working. Everything you thought was certain suddenly isn't.
Nick was at the Conan O'Brien holiday party the night before, Saturday, December 13th. He was there with his father. He was acting erratic by all accounts, and he was loudly arguing with his father.
He doesn't call it grief. It's something deeper, hollower. It wasn't a wave, he says slowly. It was a void, like someone opened a door and all the air rushed out of the room. The silence that follows feels endless. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the deck. His eyes seemed to look right through the walls of the room. The city was glowing below, Los Angeles, bright and alive, like it didn't even notice. He pauses, staring at the floor as if the memory is replaying in real time. Cars still moving on the freeway, a helicopter cutting across the sky, the sun shining like it always does. He shakes his head slowly. And I remember thinking, how? How can everything keep going? How can life move forward when something so huge just stopped? His voice turns harder, the weight of it cutting through the quiet. That's the cruel part of it. The world doesn't stop for your pain. It doesn't even blink. Jack didn't rush to the TV. He didn't check the news. I already knew what was waiting, he says, bitterness seeping into his tone. The reports soon filled in the rest. Nick had been living in the family's guest house at the time. He was found late that Sunday afternoon. Rob and Michelle were found too. The details were still unclear, but the tragedy was undeniable. Then came the noise, the speculation, the endless talk shows, the recycled photos, the so-called friends pretending to care, while the media picked the story apart piece by piece. I wanted no part of it, Jack says firmly. A silence filled with memories that refused to fade. I couldn't stop thinking about Michelle, Jack says, his voice cracking for the first time. She always had that rare mix of grace and steel, the kind of quiet strength that holds everything together when the world feels like it's falling apart. His jaw tightens, the weight of his thoughts heavy in the air. What they went through in those final moments, that's the part that never leaves you. It creeps in when the world goes quiet, the kind of shadow you can't look straight at. When the reports started to surface and Aaron Sorkin spoke publicly, his voice thick with emotion, Jack stayed completely out of sight. No press, no appearances, just silence.
Nick did not understand the nature and quality of his actions at the moment. So Nick will have to prove that he lacked a basic understanding of where he was, what was going on, what he was doing.
I wasn't thinking like an actor, he says. I was just a man trying to make sense of losing a friend and wondering if I missed something I should have seen. He takes a deep, shaky breath, his eyes clouded with thought. There was a moment, he says slowly, something that's haunted me ever since. Maybe that's why I'm talking now.
It was a few years back, Rob's birthday. They had a get-together at the house in Brentwood. Beautiful night, soft breeze, people laughing everywhere. Family, old friends, folks from the studio. His face softens as he remembers. Even Carl was there, sharp as ever, telling stories that had everyone cracking up. The place was full of love, full of light. Everything felt perfect. I was out in the garden talking with someone when I saw Nick walk in, Jack begins, his voice steady but darkened by memory. I'll never forget the look on his face. He pauses, eyes narrowing slightly. I've seen that look before, on sets, in bars, even in my own reflection back in the day. It's that kind of restless frustration that doesn't know where to go but is desperate to find somewhere to land. Jack's voice lowers, calm but uneasy. He wasn't out of control, not in the usual way. He wasn't stumbling or loud. It was something deeper, something you could feel more than see. Like his energy was off, like the wires inside were sparking wrong. He leans back, rubbing his hands together slowly. Later that night, he says, eyes growing distant, I went inside to grab another drink, and what I saw next, I'll never forget. Outside, the party was alive. Laughter, clinking glasses, music floating through the warm night air. But from inside the house, Jack caught the sound of something different. It was raised voices, he says quietly. Sharp, tense, cutting right through the noise. He stops for a moment before continuing. Nick and Rob were in the middle of it, he says softly. Nick had him cornered, not physically, but with his energy. He was standing over his father, who was sitting there, just taking it in, and Nick's voice was full of frustration, full of all those emotions that build up over time when you've got too much pressure and nowhere to put it. Jack shakes his head slightly. He was letting everything spill out, about life, fame, expectations, family,
All of it. The way he said it, it was sharp, but underneath it you could hear the pain. It wasn't hate, it was heartbreak coming out sideways. Then Jack's voice softens, the tension still visible in his face. And then Michelle walked in. His tone gentles. She had this calm about her, that same quiet strength. You could tell she'd seen this kind of moment before. She stepped right between them, placed her hand gently on Nick's arm and said his name. Just his name. Jack pauses, the image playing in his eyes like a scene he's watched 1,000 times. She said it with that unbelievable softness she always had, he says quietly.
And that was very good for him, you know what I mean? And everybody was envious, as I would be naturally at the time. But in reality now, obviously, I wouldn't trade it with him. Rest in peace.
And he brushed her hand off, not in anger, not harshly, but in this quick, sharp motion that said everything. It wasn't about force, it was about distance. It wasn't about anger, Jack says softly. It was about disrespect, and it cut through me. He draws in a deep breath, the kind that trembles just a little on the way out. Then he looked at them, both of them, his parents, the two people who had given him everything, and there was nothing in his eyes. No warmth, no connection, just this cold emptiness, like watching a storm pass through a person. Jack shakes his head slowly. It was like staring at someone who wasn't really there anymore, just hollow. His voice cracks slightly. Rob noticed me standing in the doorway, he says, barely above a whisper. Our eyes met for maybe a second, but in that single second, I saw everything. The shame, the fear, the heartbreak, and underneath it all, that endless kind of love only a father can have, the kind that doesn't quit, no matter what. Jack's eyes glisten. He gave me this small shake of his head, like he was saying, "Don't, just let it be." It meant, "Let it go, Jack. It's okay. This is just us, our family thing." Jack's voice trembles. So I did. I turned around, walked back out into that garden, and acted like I hadn't seen anything. He pauses, jaw tight. "That's my biggest regret," he says, the words scraping against his throat. He exhales hard, the sound uneven, and slowly removes his sunglasses. His eyes are red, lined with the kind of pain that comes not just from loss, but from guilt. "I thought I was respecting his space," Jack says quietly. "I thought I was honoring his faith that things would get better. But what I should have done, what I wish I'd done, was grab him by the shoulders and tell him straight, 'Rob, hope isn't a plan. Love isn't a shield. Something's wrong here, and you can't just talk it away.'" He stops, the weight of those words pressing down on the room. The air feels heavy, like even the walls are listening. Jack glances towards the window before continuing, his tone lower now. There'd already been tension, he admits. Rob and Nick had argued that week. People at the party noticed it. Nick's behavior had worried folks. It just seemed off. I remember someone saying Rob tried to calm him down, told him his attitude was out of line. It wasn't cruel, just a father trying to reach his son who was slipping out of rhythm. Jack leans back, slipping his sunglasses on again, as if trying to rebuild the distance he just tore down. "And I didn't step in," he says flatly. "Because who am I to tell another man how to handle his family? Who am I to tell a father to stop believing in his kid?"
Look at him with his head kind of shaved, and I don't know if that's what he looked like, but he looks like he's got a screw, or an evil screw. So he was 32 years old. He was at a holiday party hosted by Conan O'Brien.
He lets that sit for a moment before adding, "Aaron said he noticed something too. Doesn't surprise me. I bet a dozen of us did. We all saw the warning signs, little things that didn't sit right, but we convinced ourselves it wasn't serious." His voice grows quiet again, edged with regret. "We said he's just figuring things out. He'll be fine." We told ourselves the same lie people always tell when they don't want to face the truth. We told ourselves we were doing it out of love, out of respect for Rob, we say, shaking his head with a bitter, hollow laugh. But really, all we did was help him hold on to a hope that turned out to destroy everything. His tone hardens, the guilt in his voice now tangled with frustration at the system, at fate, maybe even at himself. That hope, that blind faith, that's what took it all apart. The conversation shifts towards the present. The aftermath, the trial, the endless headlines that refuse to fade. Nick's sitting in county right now, Jack says quietly. Charged with 2 counts. He pauses, his voice barely above a whisper. The trial set for January. The silence that follows stretches long and heavy before he lets out a sharp, humorless laugh. Justice, he says, the word rough on his tongue. They keep saying that word like it's supposed to mean something. But tell me, how do you find justice in something like this? What does that even look like?
He leans forward slightly, his voice low but steady. You lock him away forever? Then what? You hold a trial, hand out a sentence, and what does it change? It doesn't bring Rob or Michelle back. It doesn't heal the wound. It doesn't make the story make sense. Jack exhales slowly, his voice cracking just a little. All it does is turn something human into numbers, just trying to balance a ledger that can never be even again. He falls silent, the room filling with the quiet weight of everything unsaid. After a long pause, he speaks again, softer now. I keep thinking about Rami and Jake, he says. The ones left behind, the ones who still have to wake up every day and live with this. His face tightens with a mix of pride and sorrow. I read what they wrote, their statement, the way they talked about love, about memory, the way they refused to tear down their brother, even now.
Rob Reiner and Nick got into a, quote, very loud argument. His behavior at Conan's house alarmed the guests because it was so bizarre. One of the guests recalled Rob Reiner telling his son his behavior was inappropriate.
He shakes his head slowly, almost in awe. That's Rob and Michelle right there, he says, his voice thick with emotion. That's them, the way they raised their kids, with compassion, with heart, with that quiet grace that doesn't fade even when the world completely falls apart. They're protecting what's left of their family's light, says Jack softly, trying not to let one tragic moment erase a lifetime of love. He leans forward slightly, his voice carrying the weight of admiration. That's strength. That's love in its purest, toughest form. He goes quiet for a moment, staring out the window where the city fades into a golden afternoon haze. Maybe that's the only real kind of justice you ever get, he says finally. That the good they put into the world, it doesn't disappear, it keeps moving. Jack gestures faintly toward the skyline, his tone calm but sure. It lives on in the kids who didn't lose themselves. It lives in the movies, the ones that'll still make people laugh and cry long after we're all gone. It lives in the memories of the people who truly knew them, the man behind the camera and the woman who kept his world steady. He pauses, eyes distant. People close to the case have said Nick's been struggling with serious mental health issues, Jack adds gently. They say he wasn't in his right mind. There's no anger in his tone, only sorrow, the quiet kind that comes from understanding how complicated the human mind can be. Then he falls silent again, the city stretching endlessly below like a living reminder that life, no matter how fractured, never stops moving. The air in the room feels heavy, the kind of silence that holds more truth than words ever could. The recorder on the table keeps running, picking up the faint hum of the house and the distant rush of cars drifting through the canyon. Jack doesn't seem to notice it anymore. He's not performing. He's not giving an interview. He's just an old friend sitting in his living room trying to make sense of everything that's been lost. The last time I talked to him was maybe a month before everything happened, Jack says after a long pause. Just a phone call, nothing big. We talked about the Lakers, about some dumb movie trailer, just the usual back and forth. Nothing that seemed to matter, Jack says quietly, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. He pauses for a moment, lost in thought. Then he got quiet, just for a second. Jack's voice softens, touched with something almost tender. And then he said, "You know, Jack, for all the craziness, we did all right, didn't we?"
So no, I would say throughout I've had a fairly easy life, really.
We got to make movies. We got to tell stories. It's a pretty good life. Jack's lips press into a faint, bittersweet smile. And I said, "Yeah, Jack, it is." He nods slightly at the memory, the warmth of that exchange still lingering. Then we hung up. He stands slowly and walks toward the wide window overlooking the sprawl of Los Angeles. His back faces the room, his reflection faint in the glass, a lone figure against the endless city that had given him everything and taken just as much back. The silence stretches again. The hum of traffic below seems distant, almost unreal. When he finally speaks, his words come muffled through the glass. He always looked for the good in people, Jack says. That's what made his films so special. He told stories about the underdogs, about friendship, about love that actually meant something. His voice catches slightly. He believed in happy endings. He really believed in them. Jack's lips press into a faint, bittersweet smile. And I was saying yeah, right there, just a little later. Jack turns back toward the room, and the light hits his face just right, showing the years, the exhaustion, but also the strength still holding him upright. That was Rob's gift, he says, his tone tightening with emotion. That faith in people, that belief that no matter how hard things got, they'd find a way through. That's what made him an artist. He pauses, his expression shifting, hardening slightly like stone under pressure. But that same faith, he adds quietly, that's what broke him too. Because he couldn't let it go. Even when it started hurting him, he still believed things would turn out okay. Jack's voice lowers, deep and rough. He spent his whole life directing stories about heroes and shaping villains on screen. But the real heartbreak, the cruel twist, was that he never realized the danger wasn't something out there in the world. He pauses again, eyes narrowing as the weight of the thought sinks in. It was closer, too close, right there in his own home, in the people he loved the most. The sentence lingers in the air, final, heavy, and heartbreakingly quiet. It fills the room with a stillness no sound could break. That's when it becomes clear. The interview's over. No dramatic closing line, no final question. Just a silent nod, a flicker of something unreadable in Jack's eyes, a wordless, "That's enough." As the door closes behind the reporter, one image stays frozen in time. Jack Nicholson, Hollywood legend, survivor of its golden age, standing alone in his home high above Los Angeles, surrounded not by movie shadows or make-believe ghosts, but something far more human, the memory of a friend he couldn't save.
And they know that feel he's not in his right mind. There is a report that he suffers from schizophrenia.
He stands there quietly, eyes low, his face lined with stories that no film could ever capture. He had it all, Jack murmurs, almost to himself, and everyone admired him, envied him even. I did too back then. But now, I wouldn't trade places with him for anything. He lets the words fall like a final goodbye. Rest in peace. The silence that once blanketed Mulholland Drive returns, but it's different now. It's not hollow anymore. It's filled with truth, with memory, with everything that finally found the courage to be said out loud. It's the silence of closure, of something that's been buried too long, finally rising to the surface. Night has fallen over the canyon. The glow of the city below flickers like another world, distant, glittering, and indifferent to the stories whispered in its shadows. A million lights moving, each one carrying its own secret. The recorder sits still on Jack's table, its tiny red light now dark, but somehow the air in the room still feels alive, charged, like the echo of a confession that refuses to disappear. Outside, the wind weaves through the trees, brushing against the windows like a restless thought. The house feels both vast and small, full and empty at the same time.
Jack stands by the fireplace now, watching the last embers fade into a faint orange glow. His face is calm, but his eyes tell a different story, one of love, regret, and a truth that can't ever be undone. He hasn't turned on a single light. His silhouette glows faintly in the orange shimmer from the fireplace, motionless, but his mind clearly isn't.
every thought seems to weigh heavy, circling like smoke in the dim air. He reaches for an old photo frame resting on the mantel. It's a candid shot from the A Few Good Men set. Rob caught mid-laugh, head tilted back, eyes glowing with that unstoppable optimism that defined him. Beside him stands Jack, mid-smirk, frozen in a moment that feels like it belongs to another lifetime. Jack stares at the picture, his voice barely a whisper. "You always said stories could save people," he mutters. "Guess you never thought yours would end like this." His words trail off, cracking just slightly under the weight of memory. The room feels smaller now, haunted not by ghosts, but by everything that used to be. He sets the frame back on the mantel and lets out a long breath, the kind that carries both sorrow and peace. The fire flickers lower, shadows dancing across the walls, as if the past itself refuses to let go. If this story moved you, even a little, make sure to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more true Hollywood stories that dig beneath the headlines. Your support helps keep these powerful moments alive.